In a packed Memphis courtroom, 28-year-old CIA officer Maya Carter stands triumphant as Judge Evelyn Grant slams her gavel, dismissing a frivolous lawsuit from Karen Whitlock, a white woman who racially profiled Maya in a park. Cameras flash, reporters shout. But Maya's victory feels hollow as Karen smirks, whispering threats of revenge. What began as a quiet morning sketching in Overton Park spirals into a national scandal, exposing deep-seated racism and setting Maya on a collision course with a vengeful enemy whose next move will shatter her life forever. What will Karen do next? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against prejudice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's explosive episode is one you can't miss. Maya Carter perched on a weathered wooden bench beneath a sprawling magnolia tree in Overton Park, Memphis. Her sketchbook balanced on her knee as she traced the faint shimmer of the Mississippi River in the distance. At 28, with skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes sharp from years of covert CIA work, she exuded a quiet strength, though today she craved nothing more than peace. A crisp spring breeze tugged at the edges of her paper, rustling the glossy leaves overhead, while the sun cast golden streaks across the lush green expanse. She wore a simple navy hoodie and jeans, her short curls tucked under a baseball cap, blending into the scenery like any other local unwinding on a Saturday morning. Her pencil moved in swift, precise strokes, capturing the river's lazy curve, a rare moment of calm snatched from her high-stakes life tracking domestic extremists. For the agency, she'd spent the past month infiltrating a militia cell in rural Tennessee, decoding their encrypted chatter, and delivering intel that dismantled their latest plot. Now, off-duty, she let the park's serenity wash over her, a brief escape. From the shadows she navigated daily. Around her the park buzzed with gentle life. A young couple tossed a frisbee near the pavilion, their laughter floating on the wind. An elderly man shuffled along the gravel path, leaning on a cane, while a flock of pigeons scattered from a child's gleeful chase. Maya inhaled deeply, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with the earthy tang of the riverbank. She flipped to a fresh page, sketching the gnarled branches above, losing herself in the rhythm of graphite on paper. This was her ritual, a tether to normalcy amid a career cloaked in secrecy. Her CIA badge, tucked in a hidden pocket of her backpack, stayed out of sight, a silent reminder of the double life she led. She'd trained herself to compartmentalize, to let the weight of her missions fade when she wasn't on the clock, and today felt like a small victory in that endless balancing act. Her focus shattered when a shadow fell across her sketchbook. She glanced up, squinting against the sunlight, to find a woman standing a few feet away, staring with a pinched expression that radiated disdain. Karen Whitlock was in her late 40s, her blonde bob so perfectly trimmed it looked sculpted, her pale blue eyes narrowed into slits. She wore a cream blazer over a pastel blouse, the kind of outfit that screamed country club privilege, and clutched a sleek leather purse as if it were a shield. Her lips pursed tight, accentuating the fine lines etched into her face, and her posture stiffened with an air of authority she clearly assumed everyone recognized. Maya tilted her head, curious but cautious, and offered a polite nod, expecting maybe a question about directions or a comment on the weather. Instead, Karen's voice sliced through the calm like a blade. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Karen demanded, her tone sharp and accusatory, laced with a southern drawl that carried an edge of contempt. Maya blinked, caught off guard, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. She set it down slowly, resting her hands on her knees, and met Karen's gaze with a steady calm honed from years of diffusing tense situations. "I'm just sketching," she replied evenly, gesturing to her notebook. "It's a public park. I come here to relax." Her words were measured, deliberate, a shield against the hostility radiating from this stranger. But Karen's scowl deepened, her eyes raking over Maya's hoodie and jeans as if they were evidence of some crime. "You don't look like you belong here," Karen snapped, stepping closer, her heels clicking on the pavement. "This is a nice neighborhood park, not some place for people like you to loiter." The phrase "people like you" hung heavy in the air, dripping with racist venom that Maya recognized all too well. Her chest tightened, a familiar ache stirring beneath her composure, but she refused to flinch. She'd faced this before, the sidelong glances, the muttered slurs, the assumption that her blackness made her a trespasser in spaces others claimed as theirs. She exhaled slowly, centering herself, and leaned back on the bench. "It's open to everyone," she said, her voice firm but still calm. "I have every right to be here." Karen's lips twisted into a sneer, her hand tightening on her purse. "I don't think so. I've lived near here for 20 years and I know who fits in. What's in that bag? You could be up to anything." Her eyes darted to Maya's backpack, resting innocently beside her, as if it concealed a weapon instead of pencils and a water bottle. Maya almost laughed, the absurdity of it bubbling up, but she swallowed it down. "It's just my stuff," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm not bothering anyone." Karen huffed, unconvinced, and pulled out her phone with a flourish, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the screen. "We'll see about that," she muttered, dialing with a smug certainty that made Maya's stomach twist. Within moments, Karen was on the line with 911, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. "Yes, hello, I'm at Overton Park, and there's a suspicious woman here refusing to explain herself. She's loitering aggressively, making me feel unsafe. I think she might be dangerous." Maya's jaw clenched, her calm fraying as Karen painted her as a threat. She stood, slipping her sketchbook into her backpack, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid escalating the situation further. "That's not true," she called out, loud enough for the operator to hear. But Karen turned away, shielding the phone as if Maya's voice were an intrusion. "Please send someone quick," Karen added, her tone quivering with feigned fear. "I don't know what she'll do next." Maya's pulse quickened, frustration simmering beneath her skin, but she held her ground. She knew how this played out, had seen it in countless reports, and lived it in smaller doses throughout her life. A white woman's word, no matter how baseless, often carried more weight than a black woman's truth. She scanned the park, noticing a few heads turning, a jogger slowing to watch, a mother pulling her toddler closer. The attention prickled, her senses, a reminder of how fast this could spiral. Minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up the park's winding drive, its lights flashing silently, cutting through the afternoon haze. Officer Dale Pruitt stepped out, a burly man with a buzz cut and a permanent sneer. His uniform stretched tight across his broad chest. Maya recognized him from local whispers, a cop notorious for harassing black residents, his badge a license to intimidate. Pruitt swaggered over, his hand resting casually on his holster, his pale eyes locking onto Maya with a glint of malice. "What's the problem here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd already decided. Karen rushed forward, pointing at Maya like she was brandishing a weapon. "She's been sitting here acting strange, refusing to tell me who she is," I asked nicely, and she got hostile. "I don't feel safe with her around." Maya's fists balled at her sides, but she kept her face impassive, years of CIA training kicking in to mask her fury. "That's not what happened," she said clearly, stepping forward. "I was sketching quietly. She demanded I prove I belong here, then called you when I wouldn't." Pruitt's sneer widened, his gaze flicking over her with undisguised contempt. "Let's see some ID," he barked, his voice rough, his hand twitching toward his gun. Maya hesitated, weighing her options. She could flash her CIA credentials, end this now, but agency protocol forbade revealing her status unless her life was directly threatened. Besides, she doubted Pruitt would care, might even twist it against her. She reached into her backpack, slow and deliberate, pulling out her Tennessee driver's license and handing it over. "Here," she said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her throat. "I'm not breaking any laws." Pruitt snatched the card, scanning it with a grunt, his thick fingers smudging the edges. Karen hovered nearby, arms crossed, her smugness growing as if she'd already won. A small crowd had gathered now, phones out, filming the scene as it unfolded. A lanky teenager with a buzz cut, Jamal, stood closest, his camera steady, capturing every word. Maya caught his eye, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. Pruitt glanced at the license, then back at her, his lip curling. "You live around?" "Here?" he pressed, though the address on the card answered that. "Yes," Maya replied, refusing to shrink under his stare. "I'm just enjoying the park like everyone else." He held her gaze a beat too long, then shoved the license back at her, his fingers brushing hers with deliberate roughness. "Don't cause trouble," he warned, his voice low and menacing, a promise of worse to come. Karen piped up, indignant. "That's it? She needs to leave." Pruitt shot her a look, then shrugged. "She's not breaking any laws yet." He turned back to Maya, his eyes cold. "But I'll be watching." With that, he sauntered back to his cruiser, leaving Maya standing there, her sketchbook clutched. Tight, the air thick with unresolved tension. Karen glared, her victory denied, and stormed off, muttering under her breath. Maya exhaled, thinking it was over, unaware that this was just the spark igniting a firestorm that would consume her life. Officer Dale Pruitt's cruiser peeled away from Overton Park, its tires crunching gravel as the flashing lights faded into the Memphis afternoon. Maya Carter stood rooted to the spot, her driver's license still warm from Pruitt's meaty grip, her heart thudding against her ribs. She'd handed over the ID, faced down his sneer, and watched him back off when her record came up clean, no warrants, no excuses for an arrest. His parting shot, "Don't cause trouble," lingered like a sour aftertaste, but he was gone, and that felt like a win. Maya exhaled, long and slow, letting the tension bleed from her shoulders. Had she dodged a bullet? She glanced at the teenage bystander, Jamal, his phone still in hand, his dark eyes wide with a mix of awe and relief. "Thanks for filming," she said, her voice softer now, a crack in her CIA-trained armor. Jamal grinned, all teeth and bravado. "No problem, that cop's a jerk." She nodded, grateful for the unspoken alliance, then sank back onto the bench beneath the magnolia tree. The park resumed its rhythm around her. Birds chirped from the branches, a jogger's sneakers slapped the path, and the river glinted in the distance like a promise of calm. Maya pulled her sketchbook from her backpack, flipping to the half-finished drawing of the Mississippi's curve. Her pencil hovered, trembling slightly, but she forced it to move, tracing the water's edge. With deliberate strokes, she wouldn't let Karen Whitlock or Pruitt steal this moment. Wasn't this why she served? Why she risked her life in the shadows to protect her right to exist in places like this? She sketched faster, the lines sharpening as her resolve hardened. Karen had stormed off, her heels clicking furiously, her muttered vow to fix this fading into the breeze. Maya dismissed it as empty bluster. What could one entitled woman do against the truth? She leaned back, the bark rough against her spine, and let the sun warm her face, believing the worst was behind her. That illusion held for hours. She stayed. In the park until dusk, painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, finishing her sketch and even starting a new one of the magnolia's drooping blooms. The crowd thinned, leaving only a few stragglers, and she packed up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Her midtown apartment was a 20-minute walk, and she took the long route along Poplar Avenue, letting the city's hum, the clatter of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, ground her. Back home, she kicked off her sneakers, brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sank into her couch, the day's tension unraveling. She scrolled her phone absently, checking work emails from her fake consulting cover when it buzzed with a text. Then another, and another. Her screen lit up with a flood of messages from unknown numbers, each one a jagged shard of hate. "Go. Back where you came from, thug. Stop harassing decent people. You don't belong in Memphis." Maya's stomach dropped, her tea forgotten as she scrolled through the barrage. What was happening? She opened her social media, fingers shaking, and found her inbox stuffed with venom. Hundreds of notifications piled up, slurs and threats spilling across her timeline. Her breath hitched as she traced the source, a viral video posted by Karen Whitlock on a local Facebook group. The footage was Jamal's but twisted, edited with surgical precision to warp the truth. Gone was Karen's shrill demand for Maya's ID, her racist jab about people like you. Instead, the clip started mid-confrontation, showing Maya standing, her voice firm, her body angled toward Karen, making her look aggressive, menacing. Subtitles flashed across the screen. "Suspicious woman threatens park goer. while Karen's 911 call played, her voice quivering with fake terror. The post had exploded, racking up thousands of shares in hours, comments piling up like kindling for a fire. Maya's throat tightened, rage and disbelief warring inside her. How had Karen turned a quiet afternoon into this? She clicked the video again, spotting the edits, the moments where her calm explanations were cut, leaving only her defiance. Her address, pulled from some public record, was pinned in the comments, along with her job at Carter Consulting, the CIA front she'd carefully maintained. "She's a fraud," one user wrote. "Probably a criminal," another added. Her phone buzzed again, a call from an unknown number. She silenced it, but the texts kept coming, each one uglier than the last. "Leave town or pay. We know where you live." She stood pacing her small living room, the hardwood creaking under her bare feet. Her training kicked in, assessing the threat. Doxing was bad, but she'd faced worse, hadn't she? She checked her locks, peered through the blinds at the quiet street below, seeing nothing but shadows. The scale of it sank in as she refreshed the post. 10,000 shares, 20,000. A national far-right blog had picked it up, spinning her as a dangerous agitator terrorizing a peaceful park. Her cover teetered, the consulting gig, now a target for scrutiny. She thought of calling Agent Torres, her CIA handler, but hesitated. This was personal, not operational, right? She sank back onto the couch, her sketchbook abandoned on the coffee table, its serene river sketch a cruel mockery now. Karen hadn't just walked away. She'd ignited a digital lynch mob and Maya was the prey. Could one video really unravel her life this fast? She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, refusing to let panic take hold. She'd survived malicious stakeouts, decoded death threats, faced down armed radicals. This was just noise, wasn't it? But the noise grew louder. Her email pinged with a message from her gym, asking her to address concerns about her membership after complaints. Her landlord texted, vague but uneasy, about tenant safety issues. Maya's pulse raced, her mind spinning through scenarios. Karen's smirk from the park flashed in her memory. That promise to fix this now a chilling prophecy. She opened her laptop, pulling up the video's analytics, watching the views climb past 50,000. The hate wasn't random, it was organized, fueled by Karen's lie, and spreading like wildfire. She thought of Jamal's full footage, the unedited truth, but realized he'd have no reason to post it. She texted him, hoping he'd kept it, her fingers fumbling over the keys. "Hey, it's Maya from the park. Need that video ASAP. Things are getting crazy." As she waited for his reply, she stood at her window again, the street still empty, the night pressing in. Her victory over Pruitt felt like a lifetime ago, a fleeting gasp of air before drowning. Karen hadn't just called a cop. She'd launched a war, and Maya was exposed, her carefully built life cracking under the onslaught. She'd thought she'd won in the park, held her ground, sent them packing. But now, with every ping of her phone, every fresh wave of hate, she saw the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. What did Karen have planned next? Could Maya stop her before the damage became permanent? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Karen's twisting the truth is outrageous. Hit like if you're rooting for Maya to fight back. And subscribe, because you won't believe how this escalates. Now picture this. What happens when a brick shatters Maya's window in the dead of night? Stick around to find out. Maya Carter jolted awake in her midtown Memphis apartment, her heart hammering as a deafening crash splintered the quiet of the night. Glass shards rained across her hardwood floor, glinting in the dim glow of a street lamp filtering through her shattered window. She rolled off her couch, instincts flaring from years of CIA training, and crouched low, her bare feet crunching on debris. A brick lay in the center of the room, rough and heavy, a jagged red scrawl staining its surface. She edged closer, her breath shallow, and squinted at the words etched in marker, "Leave or else." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a tangible echo of the hate flooding her phone since Karen Whitlock's viral video hit the internet. Maya's pulse raced, but she forced it steady, her mind clicking into operational mode. Was this random, or had Karen's vendetta just turned physical? She grabbed a broom from the kitchen, sweeping the glass into a pile, her movements mechanical as she scanned the room for more intrusions. Her training kicked in hard. She checked every corner, every shadow, running her fingers along the baseboards for hidden bugs or cameras. Nothing. The brick was the only invader, but its weight pressed on her chest heavier than any surveillance device. She pulled her hoodie tighter, the spring night's chill seeping through the broken pane, and peeked outside. The street below her second-floor walk-up was still, cars parked in neat rows, no silhouettes lurking. Yet the silence felt alive, watching her. She sank onto a chair, the brick in her lap, its coarse edges digging into her palms. Karen's smirk from the park, her hissed promise to fix this, replayed in her mind. This wasn't coincidence. Morning broke grey and heavy, the sky a slab of concrete over Memphis. Maya taped cardboard over the window, the makeshift fix rattling in the breeze, then headed to her cover job at Carter Consulting, a nondescript office downtown where she analyzed data for the CIA under the guise of a private analyst. Her supervisor, Agent Torres, a wiry man with a perpetual frown, called her into his office the moment she arrived. His desk was bare except for a laptop and a coffee mug, the room stark, designed to reveal nothing. "What's this I'm hearing about a video?" he asked, his voice clipped, eyes boring into her. Maya squared her shoulders, recounting the park incident with Karen and Pruitt, then the viral hate campaign. She left out the brick, keeping her personal chaos separate from agency business. "It's under control," she lied, her tone steady. Torres leaned back, his chair creaking. "It better be. Your cover's thin enough without this noise. We can't intervene unless it threatens ops, but you draw more attention and you're on your own. Keep it quiet." His warning stung, a reminder of the agency's cold pragmatism. Maya nodded, biting back frustration. She'd risked her life for them, spent sleepless nights decoding militia plans, and now they'd leave her dangling over a racist's tantrum. She returned to her desk, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in her skull, and tried to focus on encrypted files. But her phone vibrated again, a text from Jamal. "Got the full video saved, sending now." Relief flickered, a lifeline in the storm. She'd fight this her way. That night she hit the gym on Union Avenue, needing to burn off the dread coiling in her gut. The place smelled of sweat and rubber mats, a familiar haven where she pounded a heavy bag until her knuckles ached. She was mid-swing when her phone buzzed with an email from her landlord. "Heard about trouble. Fix the window ASAP or we'll talk eviction." She gritted her teeth, the weight of Karen's video pressing harder. She showered, changed into fresh leggings and a tank top, and stepped outside into the humid evening, the gym's neon sign flickering overhead. She barely made it 10 steps when a police cruiser screeched to a halt beside her, its lights blinding. Officer Pruitt emerged, his bulk filling the doorway, a smirk twisting his lips. 2 more cops flanked him, their hands on holsters, faces blank but hostile. "Hands up, Carter," Pruitt barked, his voice a gravelly taunt. Maya froze, her bag slipping to the pavement, then raised her palms, slow and deliberate. Her training, screaming to stay calm. "What's this about?" she asked, her words sharp despite the tremor in her legs. Pruitt stepped closer, his breath sour with coffee. "Got a report you've been stalking someone. Karen Whitlock says you followed her near the park today. You're under arrest." Maya's blood ran cold, disbelief crashing into rage. "That's... I lie. I've been here all evening. Check the cameras." Pruitt chuckled, low and mean. "Tell it to the judge." He yanked her arms behind her, cuffs biting into her wrists, the metal cold and unforgiving. The gym's glass doors reflected the scene, a small crowd gathering, some pulling out phones, others whispering. Maya's cheeks burned, humiliation searing through her as Pruitt shoved her toward the cruiser. "You think you're smart, huh?" he muttered, his grip tightening. "Told you I'd get you." She stumbled, her sneakers scuffing the asphalt, but kept her head high, refusing to shrink. The other cops stayed silent, their eyes averted, complicity etched in their stillness. She caught a glimpse of a woman in the crowd, her face half hidden by a hoodie filming the arrest. Was it a friend or another of Karen's allies? The cruiser's door slammed shut, locking her in. the stale air inside thick with the scent of vinyl and sweat. At the precinct, Pruitt hauled her to a holding cell, the clang of bars echoing in the concrete chamber. She sat on a metal bench, her wrists raw, replaying Karen's lie. Stalking? She hadn't been near the park since yesterday. This was retaliation, pure and vicious, Karen weaponizing Pruitt's badge to strike back after his park defeat. Maya's mind raced, piecing it together. The viral video hadn't been enough. Karen wanted her broken, humiliated, caged. The cell's fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows, and she clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She'd faced armed extremists, stared down death in backwoods safe houses, but this felt dirtier, more personal. A white woman's word, a racist cop's grudge, and she was the one in chains. Hours dragged by, the precinct's hum a distant drone beyond the bars. Maya paced, 5 steps one way, 5 back, her sneakers squeaking on the grimy floor. She thought of Jamal's video, the unedited truth sitting in her inbox, useless while she was stuck here. Her apartment's broken window flashed in her mind, the brick scrawl a prelude to this. Karen wasn't playing small. She'd escalated from digital hate to physical threats to this, a fabricated arrest. Maya's stomach knotted, dread mingling with defiance. She'd get out, expose this, make them pay. But as the cell door stayed shut, doubt crept in. How far would Karen push this? How deep did Pruitt's hate run? A guard finally appeared, a stocky man with a bored expression, keys jangling at his hip. "Lawyers here," he grunted, unlocking the cell. Maya straightened, brushing off her tank top, and followed him to a cramped meeting room. Regina Holmes waited, a fierce black woman in her 40s, her braids pulled into a tight bun, her suit crisp despite the late hour. She'd taken Maya's case pro bono after a friend connected them, her reputation as a civil rights bulldog preceding her. "They've got nothing," Regina said, her voice low and steady, flipping through a notepad. "Karen's reports. Flimsy, no evidence. I'll have you out by morning." Maya nodded, relief warring with exhaustion, but Pruitt's smirk lingered in her vision, a promise of more to come. As Regina worked the system, Maya sat in silence, the rooms peeling, paint and stale coffee smell pressing in. She'd thought Pruitt's retreat in the park was the end, a victory snatched from his bias. Now she saw it for what it was, a pause, a regrouping. Karen hadn't just called a cop, she'd unleashed a machine of retribution. And this arrest was only the latest gear turning. The brick, the video, now this, each blow harder, more brazen. She rubbed her wrists, the cuff marks red and raw, and steeled herself. Regina would get her out. But out to what? What waited beyond these walls? Maya Carter stepped out of the Memphis precinct into the pale dawn, the sky a bruised purple over the city's jagged skyline. Her wrists still throbbed from Officer Pruitt's cuffs, red welts blooming where metal had bitten into her skin, but she was free. Regina Holmes, her lawyer, stood beside her, a pillar of quiet strength in a navy blazer, her braids glinting in the early light. "Karen's report was a house of cards," Regina said, her voice crisp with triumph as she tucked her notepad under her arm. "I showed the judge Jamal's full video from the park, unedited. Proves you were nowhere near her yesterday." Charges dropped. Maya's shoulders sagged, relief washing over her like a cool wave. She'd spent the night in that cell, pacing. Concrete, imagining Karen Whitlock's smug grin, but now Pruitt's snarl as he'd been forced to unlock her flashed in her mind. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice raw, meeting Regina's steady gaze. "I owe you." Regina waved it off, her lips curving faintly. "Not done yet. Pruitt's fuming, and Karen's not the type to quit. Watch yourself." Maya nodded, the warning settling like lead in her gut. She glanced at the precinct doors, half expecting Pruitt to storm out, but they stayed shut. The street hummed with early traffic, delivery trucks rattling past, a jogger weaving through pedestrians. She hugged her tank top tighter, the gym's sweat still clinging to her from last night's arrest, and headed home. Her apartment's broken window greeted her, the cardboard patch flapping in the breeze, a stark reminder of the brick that had crashed through hours before her arrest. She couldn't stay here, not with Karen's hate campaign raging online. Her address plastered across forums. She packed a duffel, essentials only, toothbrush, clothes, her CIA badge tucked in a secret pocket, and called Agent Torres. "I need a safe house," she said into the phone, keeping it brief, her voice low. As she stood by her kitchen counter, Torres sighed, static crackling on the line. "This personal mess of yours better not blow back on us. I'll set it up, but you're off-grid until it's handled." She agreed, no argument, and within an hour, a nondescript sedan dropped her at a squat brick house near Graceland, its windows curtained, its yard overgrown. The place smelled of dust and stale air, a single couch and a rickety table its only furniture. Maya sank onto the cushions, her duffel at her feet, and let exhaustion pull her under. She'd escaped Pruitt's cuffs, Karen's lie, the cells, bars. Could she finally breathe? For 2 days, she thought so. She kept her phone off, avoiding the digital venom still spreading from Karen's video. She sketched on scrap paper she found in a drawer, the Elvis Mansion's silhouette taking shape under her pencil, a distraction from the chaos. The safe house's quiet wrapped around her, broken only by the hum of a distant lawnmower or a dog's bark. She cooked ramen on a rusty stove, the steam curling up as she replayed Regina's words. Charges dropped. Pruitt sidelined. Karen's bluff called. Maybe this was the turning point, the moment the storm broke. She even cracked a window, letting spring air filter in, the scent of magnolias faint but grounding. Her guard eased just a fraction, enough to believe she'd outlasted the worst. That hope shattered on the 3rd night. She woke to a roar outside, a guttural chant cutting through the safe house's thin walls. "Get out! You don't belong!" She bolted upright, her CIA instincts snapping awake, and peered through the curtains. A mob of 20, maybe 30, swarmed the street, their faces twisted with rage, lit by the flickering glow of torches. Men in trucker hats, women clutching, purses all white, all screaming slurs that stabbed the air. Maya's stomach lurched as she spotted a figure at the edge, Karen Whitlock, her blonde bob unmistakable, her eyes gleaming with vindictive fire. How had she found her? Maya's mind raced, piecing it together. Karen hadn't stopped. She'd escalated, hiring a private investigator, Victor Slade, a greasy man with a rap sheet who tailed her from the precinct or dug up agency leaks. The mob surged closer, fists pounding the air, and Maya ducked low, grabbing her duffel. She'd faced threats before, but this was raw, unscripted hate, fueled by Karen's lies. A bottle sailed through the open window, shattering on the floor, its contents igniting in a whoosh of flame. Molotov cocktail. The fire licked the curtains, black smoke billowing as shouts grew louder. "Burn her out!" Maya coughed, her eyes stinging, and crawled to the back door, her training overriding panic. She kicked it open, slipping into the yard as another bottle crashed inside, the safe house erupting in orange heat. She sprinted through the overgrown grass, vaulting a fence, her lungs burning as the mob's roar chased her. Karen's voice cut through, shrill and triumphant. "You can't hide!" Maya stumbled into an alley, her sneakers pounding asphalt, the safe house a blazing inferno behind her. She ducked behind a dumpster, its rusted bulk shielding her as she caught her breath. Her hands shook, adrenaline surging, but she forced her mind to focus. Karen hadn't just doxed her, she'd weaponized a crowd, turned her viral lie into a physical assault. Maya unzipped her duffel, checking her badge, still safe, but her cover was cracking. She thought of Torres's warning. "You're on your own." The agency wouldn't touch this, not yet. She pulled her hoodie's drawstrings tight, her face shadowed, and scanned the alley. Empty for now. She had to move, find shelter, regroup. Her phone, powered on in desperation, buzzed with a news alert. A far-right outlet had run a story. Government plant terrorizes Memphis neighborhood, claiming her consulting gig was a front, a conspiracy fed by Slade's digging. Karen stood in a grainy photo, posing as a victim, her lies now national. Maya's jaw clenched, fury boiling over. She'd thought the dropped charges were a win, a chance to reset, but Karen had doubled down, her hate a wildfire spreading beyond the park, beyond Memphis. The mob's chants echoed in her ears, the flame's heat still prickling her skin. She'd escaped, barely, but to where? This wasn't just personal anymore, it was a war, and Karen held the matches. As she slipped deeper into the night, the city's neon glow a faint pulse ahead, Maya's resolve hardened. She'd survived the arrest, the brick, now this. Karen wanted her gone, broken, but Maya wouldn't bend. She'd fight, expose this, turn the tables. But first, she needed a plan, a place to hide, a way to strike back. The alley stretched dark and endless, her footsteps a quiet drumbeat against the chaos she'd left behind. She glanced back once, the safe house a smoldering ruin, and vowed Karen would pay. But how? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Karen's gone too far with this mob attack. Hit like if you're amazed Maya escaped, and subscribe because this story's about to get wilder. Now imagine this. What happens when Maya decides to confront Karen head-on at her own game? Maya Carter crouched in a dingy motel room off Beale Street, the neon glow of a flickering sign seeping through the cracked blinds, casting jagged stripes across the stained carpet. The air reeked of mildew and cheap cleaner, a far cry from the safe house now reduced to ash. Her duffel sat on a sagging mattress, her CIA badge still hidden inside, a secret she clung to as the world closed in. She'd fled the burning wreckage near Graceland, the mob's chants and Karen Whitlock's shrill victory cry echoing in her ears, and landed here, a temporary refuge in Memphis's underbelly. Her ribs ached from vaulting that fence, her lungs still raw from smoke, but her mind was razor-sharp, honed by years of covert ops. She wouldn't run forever. Karen had escalated this war, and Maya would fight back her way. She powered on her laptop, its faint hum the only sound in the room, and plugged in a burner USB drive, a tool from her CIA kit. Her fingers flew across the keys, hacking into Victor, Slade's email, the private investigator Karen had hired to unearth her secrets. She'd tracked his name from the far-right news hit, a sloppy byline linking him to the government plant story. The breach took minutes, her training making light work of his weak passwords. Paydirt, a thread between Slade and Karen dated 2 days ago. Found her consulting gigs a front, Slade wrote. Traced her to Graceland area. Payment cleared? Karen's reply was curt. Yes, get the proof, make her pay. Below it, a receipt for $5,000, wired to Slade's account. Maya's pulse quickened, a cold fury settling in. This was the smoking gun, proof Karen had orchestrated the mob attack. She forwarded the emails to Regina Holmes, her lawyer, with a terse note. Karen paid Slade to target me. Use this, Regina texted back instantly. Got it. Filing a countersuit tomorrow, harassment and defamation. Stay low. Maya exhaled, a flicker of hope igniting. A legal strike might scare Karen off, force her to back down from this vendetta, born in Overton Park. She leaned back in the wobbly chair, the motel's thin walls rattling with muffled TV noise next door, and let herself imagine it. Karen cornered, her lies exposed, the hate campaign crumbling. She'd survived the brick, the arrest, the fire. Could this be the knockout punch? The next morning, reality smashed that hope. Maya risked a trip to a corner store for coffee, her hoodie pulled tight, eyes scanning every shadow. She returned, to find her phone buzzing with alerts, the screen a chaos of notifications. Karen hadn't retreated. She'd doubled down. A new post on her social media crowed about protecting our community, claiming Maya's harassment had forced her to act. Photos showed a dozen picketers outside Maya's gym on Union Avenue, their signs vicious. Traitor out. No thugs here. Another group massed outside Carter Consulting, her CIA front chanting she was a government spy, menacing real Americans. Maya's stomach twisted, the coffee turning bitter in her throat. Karen had turned her countersuit into fuel, rallying her racist allies into a public crusade. She scrolled further, her breath catching as a live stream popped up. The gym picket swelled, 20 people now, their voices a guttural roar. A man, in a red cap, smashed a bat against the glass doors, cracks spidering across the surface. At the consulting office, a woman flung a rock, shattering a window, while others waved Confederate flags. Maya's hands shook, rage and dread colliding. This wasn't just noise, it was coordinated, vicious, a direct hit at her life's foundations. She thought of Torres, his warning about keeping her cover. If the agency saw this, they'd cut her loose, her career ash like that safe house. She slammed the laptop shut, pacing the room, 5 steps one way, 5 back, her sneakers scuffing. The carpet. Karen wasn't scared. She was emboldened, her hate a hydra sprouting new heads with every blow. The day darkened, clouds rolling thick over Beale Street, mirroring the storm in Maya's chest. She stepped outside for air, the motel's rusted railing cold under her. Grip when a new horror struck. Her car, parked in the lot's shadowed corner, sat lopsided, all 4 tires slashed to ribbons. A badge, soaked in dark, sticky pig's blood, rested on the hood, its edges glinting in the dim light. Maya froze, her breath a sharp hiss, recognizing the brutality. Officer Pruitt. Off duty, no doubt, but his fingerprints were all over this. A message carved in violence. "You're marked," it screamed, louder than the brick, deadlier than the fire. She scanned the lot, empty save for a stray cat darting between cars, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed on her. Pruitt wasn't. Just Karen's tool. He was a willing executioner, his badge a shield for his hate. Maya grabbed the bloody badge with a tissue, stuffing it into her pocket. Evidence for Regina if she survived this night. She retreated inside, locking the door, her hands trembling as she sank onto the mattress. The countersuit had been her move, a calculated strike, but it had backfired spectacularly. Karen's picketers weren't random. They were a militia of her making, fueled by Slade's leaks and Pruitt's grudge. The gym, her job, now her car, each hit stripped away her anchors, leaving her adrift in a city turning hostile. She pulled. Her knees to her chest, the motel's damp air clinging to her skin, and replayed the scene. Pruitt's smirk from the arrest, Karen's grin as the safe house burned. They weren't stopping. They were accelerating, each attack bolder, more savage. She opened her laptop again, pulling up the live streams, now offline but archived by eager trolls. Comments piled up, thousands strong, cheering the vandalism, calling for worse. "Run! Her out! She's a threat." Maya's jaw clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She'd thought the law would shield her, that Regina's suit would force accountability. But Karen had twisted it into a rallying cry, painting herself a martyr. The pickets weren't just protests. They were a siege, choking off Maya's life, piece by piece. She thought of Jamal's video, the emails, the bloody badge, all proof, but useless against this tidal wave of hate. The system she'd served, the justice she'd trusted, felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Night deepened, the motel's hum a faint pulse against her racing thoughts. She stood at the window, peering through the blinds, the lot still empty, the slashed tires a dark silhouette. Pruitt's blood-soaked badge weighed heavy in her pocket, a taunt she couldn't ignore. Karen had money, allies, a cop in her pocket. Maya had her wits, her training, and a fraying cover. The countersuit was a spark, but it had ignited the wrong fire, turning Memphis into a battlefield. She'd escaped the safe house, slipped Pruitt's cuffs, but this felt different, a noose tightening with every move. She sank back onto the bed, her duffel a lifeline beside her, and forced her breathing to slow. She'd counterattack again, smarter, harder, but how? Karen's next strike loomed, inevitable, and Maya braced for it, her resolve a flickering flame in the dark. Maya Carter sat in the cramped office of Regina Holmes, her lawyer, the air thick with the scent of ink and old leather, a stark contrast to the Beale Street motel's mildew. Sunlight slanted through a narrow window, catching dust motes as Regina tapped a pen against a stack of legal papers. "We've got her," Regina said, her voice a steady anchor, her braids pulled tight as she slid a document across the desk. "Restraining order granted against Karen Whitlock and Victor Slade. Judge saw the emails you hacked, the payment proof. They're barred from coming near you, your gym, your job." Maya's chest loosened, a rare breath of relief escaping. Her lips. She rubbed the fading cuff marks on her wrists, the motel's sleepless night still heavy in her bones. "And Pruitt?" she asked, her tone edged with hope. Regina's eyes gleamed. "Hearings next, we'll nail him too." The precinct hearing came fast, a sterile room downtown, all grey walls and buzzing fluorescence. Maya stood before a panel of 3 officers, their badges glinting under harsh light, her posture rigid but calm. Regina flanked her, presenting Jamal's unedited park video, the footage crisp as it showed Karen's racist rant and Pruitt's biased snarl. Maya added her own evidence, a grainy clip from a gas station camera near the motel, capturing Pruitt, slashing her tires, the pig's blood badge dripping in his hand. The panel's faces tightened, a mix of discomfort and grudging acknowledgement. Officer Pruitt's actions were unprovoked, Regina argued, her voice slicing through the room's hum. He's a danger, not a protector. Maya held her breath, the bloody badge in an evidence bag beside her, its stench faint but undeniable. Could this finally end the nightmare? The lead officer, a grizzled man with a salt-and-pepper beard, cleared his throat after a tense deliberation. Pruitt's, suspended pending review, no pay, no badge for now. Maya's fists unclenched, a surge of vindication flooding her. She'd faced him down in the park, survived his arrest, outrun his mob's fire, and now this, his power stripped, at least temporarily. Regina squeezed her arm, a rare smile breaking her stern facade. "Told you we'd get him," she whispered. As they left, the precinct's steel doors clanging shut behind them. Maya stepped into the Memphis noon, the sun warm on her face, the city's bustle a distant roar. She'd held her ground, turned their weapons against them. Was this the tide? Turning? That night she returned to the motel, her duffel lighter somehow, and sketched on the bed, tracing the precinct's stark lines, a victory etched in pencil. She'd moved past the safehouse's ashes, Pruitt's cuffs, Karen's pickets. The bias. Restraining order was a shield, Pruitt's suspension a sword. She slept deeper than she had in weeks, the motel's hum a lullaby, dreaming of a life reclaimed. But dawn brought a gut punch that shattered her fragile peace. Her phone, powered on for the first time in days, buzzed with a news alert, the headline a sledgehammer. Rogue informant terrorizes Memphis. Police union exposes truth. Her screen glowed with a leaked file, doctored and venomous, claiming she'd been a snitch gone bad, arrested years ago for assaulting a white woman in Nashville. A mugshot, photoshopped with her face, stared back, her eyes hollow, her name smeared. Maya's stomach plummeted, her sketchbook tumbling to the floor. The file was a lie, a grotesque fabrication, but it spread like wildfire, shared across every platform Karen's hate had touched. She scrolled, her hands trembling, finding the source, the police union, furious at Pruitt's suspension, striking back with a vengeance. Comments piled up, thousands strong, knew she was trouble. "Lock! Her up!" Her breath came in sharp gasps, the room spinning as she pieced it together. The union had access, motive, and no shame, twisting her win into a weapon. Her consulting cover, already frayed by Slade's leaks, teetered on collapse. She called, "Agent Torres," her voice tight, the motel's walls closing in. "They've got a fake file on me, it's everywhere." Torres's reply was ice, cutting through the line. "You've blown too much heat on us. Stand down, Carter." "No ops, no contact until this dies. You're a liability now." The call ended, a dead click echoing in her ear. Maya sank onto the mattress, her knees weak, Torres's words a betrayal sharper than Pruitt's cuffs. She'd served the agency, risked her life for their missions, and now they'd hung her out to dry over a racist cop's tantrum and a union's lie. Her phone buzzed again, her landlord texting, "Eviction notice coming, too much trouble." The gym emailed, "Membership paused pending review." Her world, rebuilt with that restraining order, crumbled under the union's smear, a systemic gut punch she hadn't seen coming. She stood pacing the room, 5 steps one way, 5 back, her sneakers scuffing the carpet. The victory in the hearing felt like a mirage, Pruitt's suspension a hollow trophy. Karen's pickets had been personal, but this was institutional, a machine grinding her down with forged paper and digital venom. She pulled up the file again, its lies glaring. Assault 2018, Nashville, known informant, unreliable. Her real past, Georgetown grad, CIA recruit, was buried under this filth. She thought of the badge in her duffel, her service, her pride. Now a liability Torres wouldn't touch. The union hadn't just smeared her. They'd painted a target, amplifying Karen's war into something she couldn't outrun. Her cover teetered, Her job lost, her home slipping away. Maya grabbed the bloody badge from her pocket, its sticky residue staining her fingers, and hurled it against the wall, a dull thud echoing. She'd exposed Pruitt, secured the order, thought she'd won, but the system had flipped the board. The union's leak wasn't random, it was payback, a warning to any black woman who dared challenge their own. She sank back, her sketchbook's precinct drawing crumpled under her foot, a symbol of false hope. Karen's face flashed in her mind, smirking from the mob, Slade's greasy grin beside her, Pruitt's sneer in the precinct. They'd lost battles, but the war raged on, and now the system itself was their ally. She'd fought with law, with proof, but this was bigger, uglier, a beast she couldn't punch. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Regina. Saw the leak. Working on it. Stay strong. Maya clutched it, a lifeline in the flood, but doubt gnawed at her. Regina could sue, could fight, but against a union's reach, a city's bias. She stood at the window, the blinds casting bars across her face, the street below a blur of headlights. Pruitt's suspension had felt like justice, a crack in their armor, but now it was her armor breaking. The union's lie spread faster than Karen's video, each share a nail in her coffin. She'd escaped the fire, slipped the cuffs, but this betrayal cut deeper, systemic and cold. She needed a new move, something bold, but what? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think the union's smear is pure corruption. Hit like if you're stunned Maya's still standing, and subscribe because this fight's far from over. Now picture this. What happens when Maya crashes Karen's own turf to turn the tables? Maya Carter stood in the Beale Street motel room, the air stale and heavy, her reflection a ghostly smear in the cracked mirror above the sink. The union's fake file burned in her mind, its lies branding her a criminal across Memphis, her CIA cover teetering under the weight of exposure. She'd won the restraining order, seen Pruitt suspended, but the victories were ash scattered by a system that turned on her faster than Karen Whitlock's mob. Her phone lay silent, Torres's abandonment a cold echo, her landlord's eviction. Notice a ticking clock. She couldn't wait for Regina's legal moves to catch up. Karen's hate was a freight train, and Maya was done dodging. She'd strike back, direct and bold, using the skills she'd honed in the shadows. She dug through her duffel, pulling out a black wig and a waiter's uniform, relics from a past op, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. Karen was hosting a fundraiser in Germantown, a ritzy suburb 20 miles east, a gala for her community safety crusade, announced on her social media with smug pride. Maya hacked the guest list from a catering company's server, her CIA training making short work of their flimsy security. She'd slip in, record Karen's lies, get proof to bury her. It was risky, reckless even, but legal battles weren't stopping this beast. She needed a knockout blow. She dressed in the uniform, crisp white shirt and black vest, tucked the wig over her curls and slipped a tiny recorder into her pocket, its red light winking as she tested it. This was her move, her war now. The drive to Germantown took 30 minutes, her slashed-tire car abandoned, a rental humming under her grip. The suburb gleamed with manicured lawns and towering oaks, wealth dripping from every brick mansion. Karen's estate loomed at the end of a cul-de-sac, its white columns stark against the dusk, string lights twinkling over a sprawling backyard. Maya parked 2 blocks away, blending into the catering vans, unloading trays of shrimp and champagne. Flutes. She flashed a fake ID at the back gate. Tasha Jones' staff. Her voice smooth, her pulse a drumbeat. The guard, a bored kid with acne, waved her through, and she slipped inside, tray in hand, weaving through a sea of tuxedos and cocktail dresses. The crowd buzzed, all white faces, their laughter a grating hum as she scanned for Karen. She spotted her near a gazebo, blonde bob gleaming under fairy lights, her cream dress hugging her frame as she held court. Karen's voice carried, sharp and theatrical, as she addressed a knot of donors. "We've got to protect our neighborhoods from threats like her," she said, her tone dripping with martyr's zeal. "She's harassed me, stalked me, and the law's too soft to stop her." Maya's jaw tightened, her tray wobbling as she edged closer, the recorder humming against her hip. Karen was rewriting history, painting herself the victim, and the crowd lapped it up, nodding, murmuring support. "I've spent thousands to keep us safe," Karen added, a lie so bold Maya nearly dropped her cover to call it out. She steadied herself, offering flutes to guests, her wig itching as she angled the recorder for every word. The audio was gold, Karen boasting about teaching that girl a lesson, admitting she'd paid Slade to dig up dirt. Her words a confession wrapped in arrogance. Maya's heart raced, victory tingling in her veins. This could end it, expose Karen's vendetta to Regina, the courts, the world. She slipped behind a hedge, uploading the file to a cloud drive, her fingers swift on her burner phone. She texted, "Regina, got her bragging, sending now." The reply buzzed back, "Perfect, I'll use it." Maya exhaled, the night air cool on her sweat-damp skin, believing she'd turned the tide. She'd infiltrated, recorded, escaped detection. Could this be the dagger to Karen's heart? The illusion shattered in seconds. A woman in a sequined gown, one of Karen's picket cronies, squinted at Maya, her glass pausing mid-sip. "Hey, you look familiar," she slurred, stepping closer, her breath sour with wine. Maya pivoted, offering a tight smile. "Just serving drinks, ma'am." But the woman's eyes narrowed, recognition sparking. "Wait, you're her!" she shrieked, loud enough to turn heads. Karen whipped around, her gaze locking onto Maya, her face twisting from confusion to fury. "That's the stalker!" Karen yelled, pointing, her voice a siren cutting through the chatter. The crowd parted, a ripple of gasps spreading, and Maya's tray clattered to the grass, flutes shattering. As she backed away, she bolted for the gate, her wig slipping. But a hulking figure blocked her path, Buddy Grayson, a former cop turned security thug, his buzz cut glinting under the lights. His meaty hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back, his sneer pure venom. "Thought you'd crash our party, huh?" he growled, slurs spilling from his lips as he dragged her toward the parking lot. The crowd followed, a pack of wolves scenting blood, their phones out, filming. Karen trailed, her heels clicking, a grin splitting her face. "Get her out," she barked, egging them on. Grayson slammed Maya against a car, her ribs screaming as his fist crashed into her jaw, blood exploding in her mouth. "You don't belong here," he spat, his knuckles raining down, each blow a thunderclap of hate. Maya crumpled, her vision swimming, the asphalt cold against her cheek. The crowd cheered, a sick chorus, their voices a blur of "teach her" and "good riddance." Grayson kicked her side, her breath hitching as pain flared white-hot, her recorder smashed under his boot. She tasted copper, her lips split, her wig gone, exposing her curls as cameras flashed. Karen loomed above, her silhouette haloed by the lights, her grin a predator's triumph. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her words a venomous promise as Grayson hauled Maya up, tossing her into the lot's shadows. She landed hard, gravel biting her palms, her body a map of bruises, her phone a crushed wreck beside her. She crawled behind a dumpster, her gasps ragged, blood dripping onto the pavement. The crowd dispersed, their laughter fading, leaving her, in the dark, broken but alive. Her plan had backfired, the audio lost, her cover blown in the worst way. Karen hadn't just countered. She'd unleashed a public execution, her allies turning Maya's strike into a spectacle of violence. She clutched her ribs, each breath a knife, and forced herself to stand swaying as she stumbled toward the rental car 2 blocks away. Her duffel, left in the trunk, held her badge, her last anchor, but her spirit teetered. She'd wanted proof, leverage, but got a beating instead, Karen's power flexing harder than ever. The drive back to Beale Street was a haze, headlights blurring through her swollen eyes, her jaw throbbing with every turn. She parked crookedly, staggering into the motel, the clerk barely glancing up as she limped past. She collapsed onto the mattress, blood staining the sheets, her body a wreck, her mind spinning. Karen's voice looped in her head. "You'll regret this." A vow of more to come. The fundraiser had been her shot, a desperate gamble, but it had flipped the board, leaving her exposed, battered, defenseless. She'd underestimated Karen's reach, Grayson's brutality, the crowd's bloodlust. Her recorder was gone, her evidence dust, her hope a flicker drowning in pain. She stared at the ceiling, cracks spidering across it like her fracturing life, and forced her breathing to slow. Regina might salvage something, might fight. But this was rock bottom, a pit dug by Karen's hate and widened by her allies' fists. Maya's CIA training screamed to regroup, to plan, but her body begged for surrender. She'd infiltrated, struck and lost, the cost carved into her flesh. Karen wasn't slowing. She was accelerating, her war a machine of rage and privilege. Maya clutched her duffel, the badge's weight a faint comfort, and vowed to rise again. But how, when every move sank her deeper? Maya Carter woke to the sting of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Her body a patchwork of pain in a Memphis hospital bed. Her ribs throbbed, cracked from Buddy Grayson's kicks at Karen Whitlock's fundraiser. Her face a swollen mess of purple bruises, her lip split and stitched. The sterile room glowed white, its walls closing in as she blinked through a haze, the memory of gravel under her palms and blood in her mouth crashing back. She'd crawled from that parking lot, driven half-blind to the Beale Street Motel, and collapsed, only to wake here, an IV dripping into her arm. Her rental car keys sat on a tray, her duffel beside her, its secret pocket still hiding her CIA badge. She tried to sit up, a gasp ripping through her as pain flared and sank back. Her spirit as battered as her flesh. Had she hit the bottom yet? The door creaked open, and Regina Holmes stepped in, her suit rumpled, her braids slightly askew, a rare crack in her polished armor. "You look like hell," she said, her voice soft but firm, pulling a chair close. Maya managed a weak smirk, her jaw aching with the effort. "Feel worse," she croaked, her throat raw. Regina set a folder on the bed, her eyes fierce. "Grayson's getting hit with assault charges. Karen, too, as an accessory. That stunt at the fundraiser was a step too far, even for her." Maya's pulse flickered, a spark of fight reigniting. "They smashed my recorder," she muttered, despair creeping in. "Lost the proof." Regina shook her head, a grim smile tugging her lips. "Not all of it." Before Maya could ask, a nurse slipped in, her scrubs a soft green, her name tag reading Latoya. She was young, maybe 25, with tight curls and a quiet strength in her brown eyes. She checked Maya's chart, then leaned close. Her voice a whisper. "I saw what happened. Was outside smoking when Grayson beat you, got it on my phone." She slid a USB drive into Maya's hand, its plastic cool against her bruised fingers. Whole thing, crowd cheering and all. Couldn't let them get away with it. Maya clutched it, her breath catching, a lifeline in her battered grip. Latoya nodded a silent pact and left, her sneakers silent on the tile. Regina watched her go, then turned back. "That's our ace. We'll use it. But the fundraiser folks will lie, say you started it. Karen's spinning this already." Maya's stomach knotted, the spark dimming. She'd gambled everything crashing that gala, gotten Karen on tape, only to be beaten down, her evidence crushed under Grayson's boot. But Latoya's video changed the game, didn't it? She closed her eyes, replaying the crowd's jeers. Karen's grin, Grayson's fists. "File it," she rasped, handing the drive to Regina. "Make it hurt." Regina took it, her nod a promise, and left to prep the case, leaving Maya alone with the beep of machines and a fragile hope. She lay there, the ceiling tiles a blurry grid, her mind churning. The hospital's hum, nurses' footsteps, a distant cough grounded her as she gripped the bed rails, pain lancing through her ribs. She'd hit rock bottom, her body broken, her cover fraying, Torres cutting her loose, but Latoya's move was a lifeline, a chance to claw back. She'd lost the recorder, her bold strike at Karen's turf flipped into a brutal defeat. Yet this video could shift the tide. Couldn't it? She forced herself to sit, wincing as she swung her legs over the edge, her hospital gown gaping. She wouldn't stay down, not with this in play. She'd survived the brick, the arrest, the fire. She'd survive this too. Hours later, she powered on a burner phone from her duffel, the screen's glow harsh against her swollen eyes. She leaked Latoya's video anonymously to a local black activist group, her fingers trembling, but sure as she typed the message. "Karen Whitlock's thug beats innocent woman. Spread it." Within an hour, her inbox pinged with alerts, the video exploding online, raw and unfiltered. Grayson's fists, Karen's smirk, the crowd's cheers, all laid bare, no edits to twist it. Protests erupted outside Karen's Germantown. Estate by nightfall, dozens strong, their signs stark. Justice for Maya. End racist lies. Maya watched a shaky live stream from her bed, the chance a faint balm on her wounds. She'd turned their violence into her weapon. Hadn't she? The activist's anger swelled, a megaphone blaring, "Karen's a coward!" as tires screeched on her pristine street. Maya's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, her bruised face throbbing with each beat of her heart. She'd hit back, flipped the script, and the city was listening. Her spirit lifted, a flicker of triumph in the dark, believing she'd gained leverage, a foothold to climb out of this pit. But dawn brought a new blow, sharp and cold. Her phone buzzed with a news update, Karen's face plastered across it, her expression defiant in a press conference. She stood beside a slick lawyer, Miles Decker, his suit tailored to intimidate, his voice smooth as oil. "This video's a setup," he declared, his words a knife. "My client acted in self-defense. That woman provoked the incident, trespassed, threatened lives. We're countersuing for defamation and assault." Maya's breath stopped, her chest tightening as Decker spun the footage. LaToya's truth warped into another lie. The crowds. Cheers became fearful reactions. Grayson's fists, necessary restraint. Karen nodded, tears glistening, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy grit. "She's terrorized me for weeks," she whimpered, her voice breaking artfully. Maya's hands fisted the sheets, rage surging through her pain. She'd leaked the video, sparked the protests, thought she'd won a round, but Karen had flipped it again, her lawyer a shield turning evidence into accusation. The countersuit landed like a boulder, crushing her fragile hope. The activist chants drowned by Decker's polished venom. She sank back, the bed creaking, her ribs screaming as she stared at the ceiling. Rock bottom wasn't the beating. It was this. Every move she made twisted against her, Karen's privilege a wall she couldn't breach. LaToya's video had lit a fire, but Karen poured gasoline, her countersuit a legal Molotov cocktail. Maya's cover teetered, her badge useless, her body a wreck, and now this, a fresh trap tightening around her. She thought of Regina, the USB drive, the protests, all her lifelines fraying under Karen's counterattack. She'd hit back, hard, but Karen hit harder, her hate a machine that never stopped. The hospital's antiseptic sting burned her lungs, a reminder of how deep she'd fallen. Yet that flicker of hope sparked by LaToya refused to die. She'd rise somehow, but how? Drop a comment with #1 if you think Karen's countersuit is a disgusting twist. Hit like if LaToya's courage blew you away. And subscribe because Maya's fight's about to explode. Now imagine this. What happens when the trial begins? And Karen drops a bombshell that flips everything Maya's built. Maya Carter sat in a Memphis courthouse, the wooden bench hard against her bruised spine, her ribs still tender from Buddy Grayson's fists a week ago. The hospital had released her days earlier, her face a fading map of purple and yellow, her spirit patched but unbowed. She wore a grey blazer, borrowed from Regina Holmes, its fit loose over her bandages, a shield against the courtroom's sterile chill. The room buzzed with tension, its high ceiling echoing every shuffle and cough, the judge's bench looming like a throne. Regina sat beside her, flipping through notes, her braids tight, her eyes sharp. They faced Karen Whitlock's emotional distress suit, a venomous claim born from the park incident, while countersuing for harassment, defamation, and Grayson's assault. Today was the opening, a chance to bury Karen's lies with LaToya's video. Could Maya finally turn this war? Karen sat across the aisle, her blonde bob pristine, her white blouse crisp, a picture of wronged innocence beside Miles Decker, her slick lawyer. Her countersuit hung over Maya like a storm cloud, twisting LaToya's footage into a claim of provocation and assault. The jury, 12 strangers with guarded faces, filed in, their eyes flicking between Maya's bruises and Karen's poised, calm. Judge Harold Vance, a wiry man with silver hair and a no-nonsense squint, took his seat, gavel in hand, and the trial began. Regina rose first, her voice steady as she laid out Maya's case. My client was racially profiled in a public park, harassed relentlessly, and brutally attacked at a fundraiser she attended to defend herself. We have video proof of the assault, showing Karen Whitlock's complicity. She played LaToya's recording, the hospital-gifted USB drive hooked to a courtroom screen. The footage flared to life, raw and unfiltered, Grayson's fists slamming into Maya, blood spraying as the crowd cheered, Karen's grin a silent command in the background. Gasps rippled through the jury, a woman in the front row covering her mouth, a man's brow furrowing deep. Maya's stomach twisted, reliving the blows, but she kept her chin up, her gaze locked on the screen. Regina paused the video, pointing at Karen. This is no victim. This is a woman who orchestrated violence to silence my client. The room hummed, the jury leaning forward, and Maya felt a surge of hope. Was this the moment Karen's mask slipped? Decker stood next, his tailored suit gleaming, his voice a smooth drawl as he spun Karen's tale. Miss Whitlock is a pillar of this community, terrorized by a woman who trespassed into her life with malice. That video? A desperate act of provocation edited to mislead. He painted Maya as the aggressor, a shadowy figure crashing a peaceful event, ignoring her bruises, her pain. Karen dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her sobs soft but audible, a performance honed to perfection. Maya's fists clenched under the table, her nails biting her palms, but she stayed silent, trusting Regina's plan. The jury's faces softened toward Karen, doubt creeping in, and Maya's hope flickered. Could they see through this theater? Regina called LaToya to the stand. The nurse's green scrubs swapped for a simple dress, her curls loose, her voice steady. I saw it all, she testified, her eyes meeting Maya's. Grayson beat her unprovoked. Karen egged him on. The crowd loved it. Decker crossed, his tone oily. You're a friend of the defendant, yes? Biased, perhaps. LaToya shook her head, firm. Never met her before that night. I just couldn't stand by. The jury nodded, some scribbling. Notes, and Maya's chest loosened. LaToya's truth was raw, unshakable, a lifeline in this legal mire. She stepped down, a quiet nod to Maya, and Regina rested, confidence in her stride. Had they landed a solid blow? Then Decker dropped his bombshell, a move so swift it stole the air from the room. Your Honor, we submit new evidence, he said, sliding a folder to Judge Vance, his smirk barely concealed. Documents proving Maya Carter assaulted a white woman in Nashville, 2018. A pattern of violence covered up by her so-called consulting job. He handed copies to Regina, who snatched them, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. Forged records, a fake police report, a mugshot with Maya's face photoshopped onto some stranger's body, the union's smear now weaponized in court. Maya's breath stopped, her heart slamming against her cracked ribs. Objection, Regina barked, standing. This is fabricated, inadmissible hearsay. Decker pressed on, his voice rising. We have testimony from Officer Dale Pruitt, who investigated her past ties to law enforcement. She's no victim. She's a threat with a hidden agenda. Judge Vance peered at the papers, his squint deepening, then overruled Regina. I'll allow it for now. Relevance will be determined as we proceed. The jury gasped, their eyes snapping to Maya, suspicion hardening their stares. She felt the shift, a tide turning against her, the bruises on her face now proof of guilt, not innocence. Regina whispered, They've got union muscle behind this. Pruitt's their puppet. Maya's throat tightened, the forged file a sledgehammer shattering her fragile stand. Decker called Pruitt, reinstated after his union's appeal. His uniform crisp, his sneer masked by a thin veneer of duty. I've dealt with Carter before, he lied, his voice gravelly. She's got a history, slippery as they come. That Nashville case, I heard whispers, dug it up. She's dangerous. Regina tore into him on cross, her questions sharp. Where's the original report? Witnesses? Evidence? Pruitt shrugged, smug. Lost in the system, but I know what I know. The jury bought it, their nods subtle but damning, and Maya's hope bled out. LaToya's video, her bruises, her truth, all drowned in the union's forgery. Pruitt's perjury a seal on her fate. The day ended, Judge Vance adjourning with a stern, We'll resume tomorrow, his gavel a dull thud in Maya's ears. She stumbled from the courtroom, Regina's hand on her arm, the hallway a blur of marble and murmurs. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, questions stabbing. Is it true you're a criminal? What's your real job? Maya ducked her head, her blazer a flimsy shield, her cover straining as their lenses bore in. Regina pushed through, guiding her to a side exit, the air outside thick with humidity, the city's pulse mocking her defeat. They've rigged it, Regina muttered, her voice low. That file's a ghost, but the jury's eating it up. Maya leaned against a wall, her ribs aching, her face throbbing. The forged mugshot burned into her vision. She'd walked in, with LaToya's video, a weapon to expose Karen, but Decker's move flipped it. The union's lie a noose tightening around her neck. Her CIA badge, still hidden, was useless here, its revelation a last resort she couldn't risk yet. Torres's silence rang louder, the agency abandoning her to this legal slaughter. Karen sat smug in that courtroom, her tears a mask, while Pruitt's testimony buried Maya deeper. The jury's glares, once sympathetic, now judged her a monster. Her bruises a lie, her fight a crime. She followed Regina to a car, sinking into the passenger seat, the leather cold against her skin. We can counter this, Regina said, starting the engine, her tone fierce but strained. Dig up the forgery's holes, discredit Pruitt. Maya nodded, her voice lost, her mind spinning. She'd thought the trial was her chance, LaToya's. Video her sword, but Karen's countersuit and the union smear turned it into a trap. Her cover teetered, reporters sniffing, her life unraveling thread by thread. She'd survived the mob, the beating, but this was a different beast, a courtroom execution backed by systemic hate. She clutched her duffel, the badge's weight, a faint pulse, and stared out the window, Memphis's lights blurring past. She'd fight on, but how when every step sank her deeper? Maya Carter slumped in the passenger seat of Regina Holmes's car, the Memphis night a smear of neon and shadow beyond the window, her bruised face throbbing with every jolt of the road. The trial's first day had gutted her, LaToya's video, overshadowed by Miles Decker's forged file and Officer Pruitt's smug lies, the jury's eyes turning cold. She clutched her duffel, the CIA badge a hidden weight, her cover a fraying thread as reporters' questions echoed in her skull. Regina drove in silence, her knuckles tight on the wheel, the courthouse fading behind them like a bad dream. Maya's ribs ached, her spirit splintered, but she forced her voice out, low and hoarse. They're winning, aren't they? Regina glanced over, her braids catching the dashboard's glow, her jaw set. Not yet, that file's a fake, Pruitt's a liar, we'll shred it tomorrow. Her words were steel, but doubt flickered in her eyes, a crack in her usual fire. Maya nodded, wanting to believe, but the jury's glares burned in her memory, their trust lost to the union's smear. She'd walked into court with proof, with truth, only to watch it twist against her, Karen Whitlock's sobs, a weapon sharper than Grayson's fists. The car hummed toward the Beale Street Motel, its rusted sign a bleak welcome, and Maya sank deeper into the seat, her fight draining with every mile. Could she claw back from this? Day 2 dawned relentless, the courtroom air thick with tension as Maya took the stand, her grey blazer stiff against her bandages, her swollen face a testament to Grayson's brutality. Regina guided her through the park incident, her voice a lifeline. Tell them what happened, she said, and Maya did, her words clear despite the pain in her jaw. Karen demanded I prove I belonged, called Pruitt when I wouldn't. It spiraled from there, the video, the brick, the arrest, the beating. The jury listened, some leaning forward, a flicker of sympathy in their eyes. Regina asked, Did you ever call her a racist, threaten her? Maya shook her head firm. No. After the park people asked what happened, I told them she demanded my ID and called the cops. That's it. Decker rose for cross, his suit gleaming, his smile a blade. Miss Carter, your composure's impressive, almost too perfect. Comes from specialized training, doesn't it? Maya's pulse spiked, her CIA instincts flaring, but she kept her face neutral. I went to Georgetown, studied international relations, she said, dodging the trap. Decker pressed, his voice silky. But you've worked with law enforcement, yes? Maybe use that to intimidate my client. Regina objected. Relevance? But Judge Vance waved it off, his squint fixed on Maya. Answer, he said, and she swallowed hard. I consult some projects touch law enforcement, never threatened anyone. Decker smirked, planting the seed, and sat, leaving the jury whispering. Karen took the stand next, her white blouse pristine, her tears flowing on cue. She's a monster, she sobbed, her voice trembling. She stalked me, crashed my fundraiser, ruined my life. I feared for my safety every day. Decker handed her tissues, his nod encouraging, and the jury softened, a woman in the back dabbing her own eyes. Regina crossed, her tone sharp. You paid Slade to dig up dirt, rallied a mob, stood by as Grayson beat her. That's fear. Karen sniffled, defiant. I protected myself. She's the aggressor. The lies flowed, smooth and rehearsed, and Maya's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. The jury bought it, their faces hardening toward her again, LaToya's video a fading echo. Court adjourned, the gavel's thud a hammer on Maya's hope, and Regina pulled her aside in the hallway, her whisper urgent. We're losing them. That file's poison, Pruitt's word gold to them. Maya's stomach sank, the marble walls pressing in, reporters' cameras flashing beyond the glass doors. What now? She asked, her voice a rasp, and Regina's eyes darkened. We push harder tomorrow, expose the forgery's holes, but it's uphill. Maya nodded, her spirit teetering, and they parted. Regina to prep, Maya to the motel, the night a heavy shroud as she limped inside. She testified, bared her truth, but Decker's trap and Karen's tears flipped it, her fight slipping away. She sank onto the motel bed, the springs creaking, her duffel a lump beside her, and stared at the ceiling, cracks snaking across it like her fracturing life. The trial was her stand, her chance to reclaim her name, but it was crumbling. The union's lie a wall she couldn't breach. She'd survived Karen's mob, Grayson's fists, but this courtroom slaughter was worse. A slow bleed she couldn't staunch. Her phone buzzed, a text from Regina. Rest up, we've got one shot left. She clutched it, a faint lifeline, but doubt gnawed her raw. The jury saw a criminal, not a victim, her bruises proof of guilt, not innocence. She'd hit rock bottom, hadn't she? That night, the darkness thickened. The motel's hum a distant pulse as Maya paced, 5 steps one way, 5 back, her sneakers scuffing the carpet. She'd lost Torres, her cover, her home, and now this, the trial slipping through her fingers, like sand. She stopped at the window, blinds casting bars across her face, the lot outside a blur of shadows. She needed air, a moment to breathe, and stepped out, the humid night clinging to her skin. She'd barely crossed the lot when a shadow loomed, Pruitt reinstated and vengeful, his bulk blocking her path. His uniform was gone, replaced by a black jacket, but his sneer was unmistakable. A gun glinting in his hand, its barrel a cold, high staring her down. Thought you'd win, huh? He growled, stepping closer, his breath sour with whiskey. Suspended me, shamed me. I'll finish you if you take that stand again. He shoved her against the motel wall, the brick scraping. Her back, the gun pressing into her temple, its metal icy against her bruised skin. Maya's heart slammed, her training screaming to fight, but her body froze, ribs screaming, strength sapped. Back off, she hissed, her voice a thread, and Pruitt laughed, low and mean. Not this time. Headlights flashed, a car turning. In, and he bolted, melting into the night, leaving her shaking, her knees buckling as she slid down the wall. She stumbled inside, locking the door, her gasps ragged, the gun's imprint burning her skin. Pruitt's threat was a death knell, a promise beyond Karen's courtroom lies. A cop's hate turned lethal. She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling, the badge in her duffel a useless shield. She'd escaped, barely, but the encounter shattered, her all seeming lost. The trial was a slaughter, the jury against her, and now this, a bullet waiting if she pushed on. She thought of Regina's text, 1 shot left, but it felt like a whisper in a hurricane. Karen's tears, Decker's forgery, Pruitt's gun, a trifecta crushing her will. She'd survived the fire, the beating, but this was checkmate, wasn't it? She curled up, the mattress sagging, her ribs a dull ache, her mind spinning. She could flee, leave Memphis, abandon the fight, let Karen win. The thought clawed at her, tempting, but her training, her pride roared back. She'd faced militias, decoded death plots, taken bullets in shadows, and lived. Pruitt's gun was a scare, a bluff, right? She forced her breathing to slow, her resolve flickering, her ember in the dark. Regina had a plan, a last stand, and Maya wouldn't run, not yet. She'd face the courtroom again, battered but unbowed, and find a way. But how, when death loomed outside and lies ruled within? She clutched her duffel, the badge's weight a faint pulse, and braced for dawn, her fight teetering on collapse. Maya Carter limped into the Memphis courthouse, her bruised body a map of pain, her grey blazer hanging loose over bandages still tight from the hospital. The motel wall's brick scrape stung her back, Officer Pruitt's gun a cold memory against her temple from the night before, but she walked tall, her jaw set despite the ache. Regina Holmes waited in the hallway, her suit crisp, her braids pulled back, her eyes narrowing at Maya's haggard look. "What happened?" she asked, voice low, and Maya leaned close, whispering, "Pruitt ambushed me, gun to my head, threatened to kill me if I testify again." Regina's face hardened, a storm brewing in her gaze. "We're using this. You're revealing it all today, aren't you?" Maya nodded, her voice a rasp. "No choice left." They entered the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation, the jury's eyes flicking to her swollen face, Karen Whitlock's smug calm across the aisle. Miles Decker adjusted his tie, his smirk a blade, while Judge Vance settled at the bench, his silver hair glinting under the lights. Maya took her seat, her duffel at her feet, the CIA badge a hidden fire in its pocket. She'd lost everything, her cover, her home, her hope, but Pruitt's threat was the final straw, a death sentence she'd turn into a weapon. Regina leaned over, her whisper urgent. "When you're up, drop the bomb, show the badge, it's our last play." Maya's hands trembled, but she steadied them, resolve steeling her spine. Could this flip the tide? The session began, Decker, calling Pruitt back, his reinstated uniform a taunt, his sneer masked by a thin layer of duty. "Carter's a liar," he said, his voice gravelly. "That video's staged, her bruises fake. She's been after Miss Whitlock from day one." Regina objected. "No evidence supports this," but Decker waved a hand, Pruitt's lies piling. "Higher." The jury nodded, their trust in his badge unshaken, and Maya's stomach twisted, her fight slipping further. Regina stood, her turn now, and called Maya to the stand, her voice a lifeline. "Tell them about last night," she said. And Maya rose, her ribs screaming, her steps slow but sure, the courtroom hushing as she faced them. She gripped the stand, her bruised knuckles whitening, and met the jury's gaze, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Last night, Officer Pruitt ambushed me outside my motel," she began, her words cutting the silence. "Pinned me to a wall, put a gun to my head, said he'd kill me if I kept fighting. This isn't about a park anymore, it's about silencing me." Gasps rippled through the room, a juror's pen freezing mid-note, Karen's smugness faltering. Maya reached into her blazer, pulling a tiny audio recorder from her pocket. Its casing scratched but intact, a backup she'd slipped on after the fundraiser beating. She pressed play, Pruitt's growl filling the air. "I'll finish you if you take that stand again," his whiskey slur unmistakable. The courtroom erupted, murmurs swelling, Judge Vance banging his gavel. "Order!" Decker leapt up, his face flushing. "Objection, unverified recording, no chain of custody." Regina countered. "It's admissible as a statement against interest, Your Honor. Pruitt's a witness here." Vance squinted, then nodded. "I'll allow it, proceed." Maya exhaled, the jury's eyes widening, doubt cracking their wall of bias. She seized the moment, her voice rising. "I've been harassed, beaten, framed because I wouldn't bend. Karen Whitlock started this in Overton. Park and Pruitt's her enforcer. But I'm not who they say," Decker sneered, leaning forward. "What are you then, Miss Carter? A victim with convenient gadgets?" Maya met his gaze, her hands shaking as she reached into her blazer again, pulling the black leather case she'd guarded through fire and blood. She flipped it open, holding her CIA badge aloft, its gold shield catching the light, her credentials stark against the chaos. "I'm an intelligence officer with the Central Intelligence Agency," she said, her voice a thunderclap. "I track domestic extremists, protect this country, not harass citizens. Karen profiled me, Pruitt hunted me, and they've lied to bury me." Gasps exploded, the jury gaping, Karen's mouth dropping, her tissue falling to the floor. The room spun, reporters scribbling furiously, their pens a frantic scratch, the bailiff stepping closer as if to verify. Maya handed the badge to Regina, who passed it to Vance, his fingers tracing its edges before sealing it into evidence. Decker recovered, his voice shrill. "This is preposterous. She's bluffing, Your Honor, no proof." Maya stood taller, her ribs a dull ache, her resolve iron. "Check it. It's real. I've de-escalated every step, trained to protect, not threaten. Pruitt's the thug here, not me." Regina stepped in, her tone fierce. "Her status proves she's no aggressor. Your Honor, it's Whitlock and Pruitt who've terrorized her, not the reverse." Karen fidgeted, whispering to Decker, her face paling as the jury shifted, their eyes darting between Maya's badge and Pruitt's scowl. Vance leaned forward, his squint piercing. "Mr. Decker, if she's bluffing, you'll have your chance. But this changes context. Proceed carefully." Decker sputtered. "She's still intimidating, badge or not." Maya cut in, her voice steady. "I've risked my life for this country. Karen saw my skin, decided I didn't belong, and Pruitt's gun proved it last night. That's the truth." The jury's faces softened, a man in the back nodding, a woman's brow furrowing, the tide teetering. Regina played the audio again, Pruitt's threat looping, a nail in his coffin, and called a surprise witness, the motel clerk, a wiry kid with nervous hands. "Saw a guy in a jacket last night, big, mean-looking, pinning her outside," he stammered, glancing at Pruitt. "Heard him yell something about finishing her." Decker floundered. "Hearsay." But Vance waved it off. "He's an eyewitness. Sit down." The clerk stepped down, Pruitt's sneer cracking, Karen's composure fraying as she gripped her chair, her nails white. Maya's heart pounded, her gamble paying off, the badge and audio a 1-2 punch, shaking the courtroom's foundation. Had she turned it at last? Decker regrouped, his voice oily. "So you're CIA doesn't mean you didn't provoke my client." "That badge could intimidate anyone." Maya faced him, unflinching. "I hid it to protect my work, not flaunt it. Karen's lies brought us here, not my job." The jury listened, their doubt shifting toward Pruitt, toward Karen, her sobs now, hollow against the audio's raw truth. Regina rested, her nod to Maya a silent victory, and Decker flailed, his questions weaker, the jury's eyes harder on him. Maya stepped down, her legs trembling, the stand's wood slick with her sweat, and sank beside Regina, the room a blur of murmurs and stares. The day ended, Vance adjourning. "We'll hear closings tomorrow." His gavel a sharp crack. Maya lingered, watching Karen whisper frantically to Decker, her face a mask of panic, Pruitt's glare a fading threat. Regina squeezed her shoulder. "You did it. They're rattled." Maya nodded, her breath shallow, the badge's reveal a seismic shock that flipped the narrative. She'd walked in broken, all lost, but stood now with a chance, the jury's shift a lifeline. Pruitt's audio, her credentials, the clerk's words, they'd cracked Karen's lies, hadn't they? She left the courtroom, reporters swarming. Their flashes blinding, but she pushed through, her head high despite the pain. Outside, the Memphis dusk settled, the air thick with river damp, the city's pulse a faint drumbeat. She leaned against Regina's car, her duffel at her feet. The badge's weight gone from her hands but heavy in her mind. She'd risked it all, blown her cover, faced Pruitt's gun, and stood tall, her final stand a roar against the storm. Karen's smirk was gone, Decker's bluster shaken, the jury teetering on her truth. She'd survived the mob, the beating, the lies, and now this, a courtroom fight that might save her. But would it hold? She climbed into the car, her ribs aching, her spirit flickering, and braced for the end, her fate in 12 strangers' hands. Maya Carter sat rigid in the Memphis courtroom, her grey blazer damp with sweat, her bruised hands clasped tight as Judge Harold Vance returned from chambers, his silver hair a stark line against the dark wood of the bench. The jury filed in. Behind him, their faces unreadable, a mix of furrowed brows and tight lips, the air heavy with the weight of her final stand. Regina Holmes sat beside her, her notepad still, her braids glinting under the fluorescent lights, a quiet strength in her posture. Across the aisle, Karen Whitlock perched beside Miles Decker, her blonde bob immaculate, her white blouse a facade of innocence, though her eyes darted nervously. Officer Pruitt slouched nearby, his reinstated uniform a taunt, his sneer gone. After Maya's audio and CIA badge rocked the room yesterday. Could this be justice at last? Vance cleared his throat, his voice a gravelly anchor in the buzzing silence. I've reviewed Miss Carter's credentials privately with federal confirmation. They're authentic. This court will now hear the verdict. He nodded to the jury foreman, a stocky man with a greying beard, who stood, paper trembling in his hand. Maya's heart slammed against her cracked ribs, her breath shallow, the memory of Pruitt's gun and Karen's grin a shadow over this moment. On the charge of emotional distress by Karen Whitlock against Maya Carter, the foreman read, we find the defendant not liable. A murmur rippled through the room, Karen's gasp sharp, and Maya's shoulders sagged, relief flooding her veins. On the countersuit for harassment, defamation, and assault, he continued, we find in favor of Miss Carter. We award her legal fees and recommend charges against Whitlock and Pruitt. The courtroom erupted, gasps and whispers swelling, Vance's gavel banging for order as Decker shot up, his face red. This is outrageous, Your Honor. That badge doesn't erase her actions. Vance cut him off, his squint piercing. The evidence does, Mr. Decker. Audio of Pruitt's threat corroborated by a witness, and Whitlock's role in the assault video stand unrefuted. Sit down. Karen clutched her chair, her nails digging in, her mask of tears replaced by a scowl, while Pruitt's hands balled into fists, his jaw twitching. Maya exhaled, her bruised face throbbing. The jury's verdict, a lifeline she'd clawed for through fire, beatings, and lies. Had she finally won? Regina squeezed her arm, a rare smile breaking her stern facade. You did it, Maya. They're cooked. The judge spoke again, his tone stern. Miss Whitlock, your suit's dismissed with prejudice. I'm ordering a perjury investigation based on your testimony. Officer Pruitt, you're detained pending assault and attempted murder charges from last night's incident. Bailiffs moved, cuffing Pruitt mid-protest, his growl cut off as they hauled him out, his uniform a crumpled disgrace. Karen stood, trembling, Decker whispering frantically, but Vance wasn't done. Miss Carter's been dragged through hell to defend herself. This court won't tolerate such abuse. He banged the gavel, finality ringing, and Maya's eyes stung, tears pricking as relief crashed over her. She rose, her legs shaky, the courtroom a blur of wood and faces, reporters swarming the aisles, their cameras flashing like gunfire. Karen bolted, shoving past Decker, her heels clicking a desperate retreat, but the press engulfed her, questions stabbing. Why'd you lie? What about the mob? Maya turned away, Regina guiding her to a side exit, the marble hallway cool against her fevered skin. Outside, the Memphis sun blazed, the air thick with river damp, and she leaned against the wall, her duffel at her feet, the badge no longer hers to hide. She'd blown her cover, faced Pruitt's gun, and stood tall, her truth shattering Karen's. War. Was this the end she'd fought for? The victory tasted sweet, a crowd gathering, some clapping, a black woman in the throng shouting, "You showed 'em!" Maya managed a nod, her lips stitches pulling, her spirit lifting despite the pain. Regina's phone buzzed, a text from the activist group. Protests worked, justice served. Maya's leak of LaToya's video had fueled this, hadn't it? She'd turned Karen's violence into her downfall, the jury seeing through the lies, Pruitt's threat the final nail. She straightened, the city's pulse a faint drumbeat, believing she'd reclaimed her life, her name, her dignity. But the sweetness soured fast, a twist slamming into her like a freight train. Her burner phone vibrated, A call from Agent Torres, his voice iced through the line. "Carter, you're suspended, effective now. Revealing your status breached protocol. Internal reviews coming, and your career's likely done." The words hit harder than Grayson's fists, her breath stopping, the courthouse wall cold against her back. "I had no choice," she rasped, her throat raw, but Torres cut her off. "You did. You chose exposure over discretion. We're done here." The call ended, a dead click echoing, and Maya's knees buckled, her duffel slipping as she sank to the steps. The CIA, her anchor, her pride, ripped away for surviving Karen's hate. Pruitt's gun. A trial she'd won but lost everything. To fight. She stared at the pavement, cracks snaking like her shattered path, the crowd's cheers a distant hum. She'd beaten Karen, caged Pruitt, but at what cost? Her cover blown, her job gone, Torres's betrayal a knife in her gut. She'd served, risked her life in shadows, decoded militia plots, and now this, discarded for daring to stand. Regina, crouched beside her, her hand warm on Maya's shoulder. "We'll appeal it, fight them too," she said, her voice fierce. But Maya shook her head, her spirit teetering. "They don't bend," she whispered, the badge's memory a ghost, her triumph hollowed out by this gut punch. Karen's voice cut through the haze, shrill and unhinged, as she burst from the courthouse, reporters trailing her like hounds. "This isn't over," she screamed, her face twisted, her blouse wrinkled, a far cry from her poised facade. "I'll ruin you yet, Carter. You think you've won?" Maya stood, her ribs aching, her gaze locking onto Karen's wild eyes, a new threat blazing through. The venom. Decker tried to pull her back, his suit rumpled, but Karen shoved him off, her rant escalating. "I've joined the Patriots' Dawn, a real group who'll finish what I started." "You'll see." The crowd gasped, reporters scribbling, and Maya's blood chilled, recognizing the name. A racist militia she'd tracked for the CIA, now Karen's new army. The twist landed, a seismic shock flipping her victory into a nightmare. Karen wasn't broken, she was reborn, her hate finding a deadlier home, a prison vow to strike from behind bars. Patriots' Dawn was no idle threat. Maya knew their files, their bombs, their bloodlust, and Karen's wealth could fuel them. Decker dragged her away, her screams fading, but the promise lingered, a dark cloud over Maya's fragile win. She'd dismantled Karen's lies, caged Pruitt, but unleashed a monster, a militia with her name in their sights. Regina stood, her face grim. "She's bluffing, right?" Maya shook her head, her voice a rasp. "Not with them, they're real." The reporters swarmed again, cameras flashing, voices shouting, "CIA agent targeted by militia." "Whitlock joins extremists." Maya pushed through, her head high despite the pain. The courthouse steps a battlefield she'd conquered and lost. She reached Regina's car, sinking into the seat, the leather cold, her duffel a lump beside her. The verdict was justice, Pruitt's cuffs a triumph, Karen's perjury a reckoning, but Torres's suspension and Karen's militia pledge twisted it bitter, a victory with teeth. She'd fought for her life, her truth, and won, only to face a new war, jobless, exposed, a target painted on her back. Memphis blurred past, the river's gleam a faint pulse, the city's hum a mocking chorus. She'd survived the park, the brick, the fire, the beating, the trial, but this ending was no end, a cliffhanger with claws. Karen's militia vow echoed, a promise of vengeance from a cell. Patriots' Dawn, a shadow stretching beyond these walls. Maya clutched her hands, the bruises fading but the fight eternal, her spirit unbroken yet unmoored. She'd won the courtroom, lost her career, and gained a foe deadlier than before. Regina drove in silence, the road stretching dark, and Maya braced for what came next, her triumph a fragile shield against a storm reborn. Maya Carter's journey offers profound lessons on resilience, systemic injustice, and the cost of standing against prejudice. First, her story underscores the power of perseverance. Facing relentless attacks from Karen Whitlock's racial profiling, in Overton Park to Officer Pruitt's gun at her temple, Maya refused to break, using her CIA training to fight back with evidence and truth. Her grit shows that even when the odds stack high, courage can carve a path through chaos. Second, it exposes the ugly reality of systemic racism. Karen's lies, amplified by a corrupt cop and a vengeful police union, turned a simple park encounter into a life-shattering war, revealing how privilege and power twist justice against the marginalized. Maya's forged file and Pruitt's reinstatement highlight how institutions protect their own, leaving victims to fend alone. Third, the tale warns of unintended consequences. Maya's victory, exposing her CIA badge to win the trial, cost her career and unleashed Karen's militia threat, proving that truth can come with a steep price. It's a reminder that battles against hate don't always end cleanly. They can spark new, deadlier fights. Finally, it celebrates unlikely allies like LaToya and Regina, whose courage and support turned despair into hope. Community can be a lifeline when systems fail. What's the takeaway? Stand firm but know the cost. Justice isn't free, and prejudice doesn't vanish quietly. So what do you think? Was Maya's fight worth the price she paid? Drop a comment. Below, hit like if her resilience inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of grit against injustice. Share this if you believe truth should triumph over lies. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. Here's to strength in the face of adversity and a future where fairness prevails.